Hey, what's going on? I am back, and I have a bit of a little presentation and lesson that I want to record. Um, at the time of this recording and presumably upload, I have just finished the Doing Everything Live series. The point of that was I wanted to basically give the most firsthand, authentic look at my building process. A lot of times when better players try to communicate. Um, the rationales that they have for their build. A lot is lost, not necessarily in terms of the end content, but how to mentally get there. And I think that's often where a lot of newer players struggle. So that was the goal. One thing I did notice, well, while much of that was certainly a success, I do think a big thing is there's a very major concept in building. As you can see on here, it's called, I refer to it as sequences, and we'll get into what that means. But I did a lot of the sequencing work in my head and not necessarily explaining it every time. But I think that's actually one of the most important concepts for you all to get. So I decided to throw together a little Google Slides, and then we're going to do some work in the builder to try and apply it to real matchup scenarios. But yeah, so what are sequences? I'm first going to start with what they are not, and then say what they are. And then you can ask, oh, well, did you invent the word sequences or whatever? No, of course not. And also, I'm not sure if this is if only I think, if this method of building and thinking about the game is personal to me. My hunch is that kind of everybody on the higher end of play does this, but the mental process hasn't necessarily been described or codified in the way that I attempt to. So with that in mind, calling them sequences and defining what they mean, this is my nomenclature, so I can do what I want. But anyway, what they aren't. A sequence is not any number of turns that take place in succession. So it's not like you're going to watch a game and just see, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and however that plays out, it's oh, that's a sequence. That's not the case, or at least that's not what is meant when I say it. And then anytime two Pokemon interact, this is kind of a similarly reductive interpretation of what a sequence is. Two Pokemon can interact in all sorts of different ways, and it doesn't make it a sequence. A sequence, as I use it and try to communicate it, it's a chain of plays taking place over a series of turns, each play pre-planned in the builder before the game ever started. So I'm going to give a much better, easier to understand example as we go on. But the idea basically is when you're building something, you're building a set, you have an idea of how it's going to get on the field, how your opponent will react to it, what move you will click. Given how you think your opponent will react, what move you will click on that switch, what move you will click after your opponent reacts. These are all things that you have decided before the Pokemon that we're talking about ever gets sent out. And so those things that I just talked about, that's turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and possibly even turn 4. And they're all 4 different turns, and there may be multiple plays within that turn, but you've pre-planned how this set of turns were gonna go. And that's kind of how I mean it when I refer to sequences. Also, a side note, if you notice the Pokemon that I've used here, they're not picked for any particular reason in terms of any instructive reason. They're just Pokemon that I like to use. So my favorite Pokemon that I like to use. So skills you will need. You will need the ability to accurately visualize turns. What this means is you can't, obviously mocks are good, and when you're building an ideal world, you'll get many mocks. But when you're coming up with ideas in the builder and trying to see oh, is this an idea worth pursuing? Does this work? Or whatever. You want to be able to envision how a turn will play out accurately. So if I send this out, I think his best play is probably going to either be to knock, scald, or rock. And so I have I'll switch into that, and then that will make him switch into this. You need to be able to mentally run through these exercises and these thought experiments in your head. So being able to think turn 1, I'll do this, he'll do this. Next turn, I'll do this, he'll do this, and so on. So you need to be able to just mentally be able to do that, but then also on top of that, be able to do so accurately. So if your understanding of like how your opponent will respond to you is like totally way off, then you're going to struggle to do this. Even if you can technically visualize and follow the chain of events, if your assessment of what those events will be are totally off, then you're still going to have a hard time. The other thing is consider a vast array of different options your opponent may have at one time. This sort of was foreshadowed when I just said, when you're trying to assess like what your opponent might do on a given turn, and then finding out what play you're going to make to cover it. Your opponent usually, people like to say like, oh, they have 4 move slots and 5 Pokemon they can switch to. So you have, I don't know, what is that, 20 options, whatever. But it's obviously that's kind of like silly. But it's more the case though, like that your opponent has maybe 1 or 2 switches that work. Sometimes it's just 1, sometimes it's 0, it just depends. And a couple different moves that they can click. And a lot of the times, because a big part of draft is kind of like gathering information and figuring out like what your opponent, not only what your opponent's going to click, but what moves they even have, what set they even are. You're often considering not just the moves that they have clicked and have revealed, or what you think they're going to have, but also all the possibilities of things they could have. And then given those possibilities, which ones they will pick in this moment. So you need to be able to consider all of these things at one time. When you're assessing how a turn is going to go, you need to be able to have a very flexible and probabilistic mental approach to what you think your opponent might do. And then finally, think from your opponent's perspective. This is something I've pretty much hit in one way or another on all these. But sometimes people have this issue where they come up with sets. This happens a lot with heat sets, where like they're creative and cool and everything, and so they can't. That mentally they like have to, for their own like emotional or their own morale, they like have to assume that their opponent is going to perfectly play into their hand for their heat set. That's obviously like a more extreme example, but you have to be able to accurately model your opponent's perspective and the things they might do, rather than insisting in your own mind that they're going to behave in a way that you think they should, or a way that you think will work well for you or whatever. You need to be able to step back and try and assess your opponent's likely behaviors honestly. And the last one I have here is, why are sequences important? Sequences are important for a few reasons. They help you get out of the abstract. And what I mean by that is really in the second bullet. You understand the precise fit of a Pokemon within the game plan. A lot of people, whether they're drafting or building or whatever, everything they do is kind of abstract. I think of an example. There's someone I used to build with all the time, and we would talk about what 4 moves they would have on a particular set. And where I'm coming from is I'm thinking like, okay, if this thing is out, it's going to come in on this. He'll either stay in and click this, or he'll switch out into a Pokemon that will then do this. And let's say that Pokemon that might switch in is something we don't have an attack for. Like, let's say it technically walls us. Well, that kind of reduces to, okay, I probably want to pack either Toxic or Knockoff or Hazard, or like one of those. Something that gives me a click that generates me progress on a passive turn on a Pokemon that I otherwise wouldn't be able to damage. And so I think in this particular case, I was like, oh, well, I think let's just slap Knockoff on this. And then he said, well, I don't think I really need Knockoff because I have Knockoff on this other Pokemon. And the flaw in this type of abstract thinking is that if I as a general goal want to remove items from things or maybe a specific Pokemon, I just need to have Knockoff somewhere on the team, and I'll use that guy to click Knockoff on that Pokemon. I think people tend to think this way, whether they even intend to or think they're doing it or not. When the reality is, like, you have to consider this Pokemon you want to get the item off. Does it ever even come in on this Pokemon? Is there ever a situation where these two Pokemon are ever even interacting? Another, like, sort of on this topic is, like, people will say, like, oh, well, this Pokemon isn't an issue for me because I have this other Pokemon that has a super effective hit on it. And it's like, well, if they have a very reliable switch into that Pokemon, then that Pokemon can check and stop and agitate you in whatever way that it can. And then when you bring in that super effective, hit, they just have a free switch, and you ended up not threatening that Pokemon at all. That Pokemon is still at full health, and it'll come in and bother you in the same exact way again. So it's not enough to think so abstractly where it's like, well, let's say I'm facing a really strong fire type. Oh, well, I have a water type on water type attack on this Pokemon, so I'll just like use that. The game doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. You're playing an opponent who is reacting intelligently, and by intelligent I just mean I'm not gonna get into that. Your opponent is reacting. It's a human brain on the other side who has prepped all week just like you have, and is reacting to what you are doing. They're not just going to keep their fire type in on the hydro pump, all right? They're switching. And you can either punish that or you can't, right? So understanding this in terms of literal turns, like he goes this, then goes this, clicks this, I should click this, I'll switch out in case he does this. You need to be thinking in this way about everything. Every single thing in the builder, every idea you have, everything. When you're not thinking like this, you're just kind of throwing guys together, and then you'll run into this issue, which I'm sure many of you have, where you go into the game and then like nothing really works how you envisioned it. You don't have switch-ins to this or whatever. So big thing, get out of the abstract. It also generates better quality ideas in prep and helps you troubleshoot and solve specific matchup problems better in the builder. This is kind of piggybacking off the more granular idea that I was just espousing, which is if you're able to think in terms of like a precise fit in a game plan, what this thing's going to come in on, what it's going to do, and all that, you're narrowing. Whenever you're trying to like figure out, okay, this set isn't working, what should I do? Your scope is so much more narrow and tailored to the specific problem that you're having, and it's a lot easier to come up with ideas that work when you're not looking. When basically there's a lot more to eliminate in terms of what works when the problem you're solving is really narrowed down to a specific interaction that's not working. So that allows you to like generate better ideas, because you're really generating better ideas because you're just thinking more directly about how a game plays out, which is just naturally better. But then the troubleshooting process, whenever you have like mocks that don't go well or whatever, it's a lot easier to do that well when when your scope is a bit more focused on a specific problem you're trying to solve, rather than, oh, this guy's good against me, I need another ground move somewhere. Like it's just way harder to come up with ideas that work that way. And then finally, think more clearly during the game. Instantly know what to do most turns. If you've spent an entire week not only mocking but building, and every single Pokemon has a place to go, it comes in on this, does this, and you kind of have worked out all the different things that you would do in the scenarios that you expect to face. When the game actually comes, you don't have to sit there with your thumb in your ass watching the timer go down, because you've already thought about what you would do in this situation. You've already thought about what pieces you need to protect. You need to have, over 60% health on this so that it always lives, outrage from this thing. Like, you've already thought about these things. And so it's kind of second nature. You don't really have, you don't have to think through or consider all these things because you already did throughout the week in the builder. So yeah, this is just kind of a quick little presentation. And now, I'm going to pan over. I still have to think about how I'm going to do this, but so I'm going to pan over. We're going to do a few examples we're going to sequence out a lead, a defensive check, and then we're going to sequence out a Wincon, and I'll show you how to do each of them. And hopefully that'll make sense when you're building on your own. The way that we sequence is through flow charting, making flow charts. You've probably heard of what they are. You've almost certainly seen them, but if you don't know what they are, go ahead and pause the video, maybe look them up for 20 seconds of your time, and we'll be on the same page. But yeah, basically, it's not that, whenever a good player builds, they just whip out their paper and draw like a million flow charts, but that the flow chart is a good model, a good map of how good builders think through the functionality of the sets, if that makes sense. So yeah, I need to rearrange some stuff, and then we'll get into doing that. So, yep. All right, so I'm set up here. I had Sin of Wrath put together 3 totally random matchups across 3 different formats. I don't know what these games are from, what tours they're from, who's playing in them. I just know that they're from some random place, and the games are also already played. So if you happen to stumble across this video and you see that one of these games is yours, then I guess that's cool. Yeah, so I have a video here because drawing out the flowchart will be a lot easier to understand. So with this first matchup you can see here, I'm going to talk about, we're going to make a lead out of this one, and we're going to look at how to flowchart a lead. I have talked about a lot in building this idea of sequences from the perspective of the lead, and in some ways it's the easiest to understand if you're just trying to do the process one time. But what I realized over time is that it's in a way also more difficult to understand when you try to adapt the concept of sequences to other sets that are in the build. Obviously not every set is a lead. So fitting new sets into the plan that might take place in the mid game or the end game or whatever, it's a little different than how you would do the lead. So we're going to do all of them today. I'm going to start with the lead, then I'm going to do a defensive check, how you would sequence that, and then also a Wincon last. And you'll know how to sequence all of those, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding than you did when you walked in. So, so we're going to start with the lead. This is an SV matchup, as you can tell. The first thing that I would say when it comes to leads is it's there. If I said this, it'd be obvious that, like, obviously not everything can lead. Some Pokemon lead better than others. Something like getting hazards up early, you know, is something that people want to do. So there are certain Pokemon that fit like an archetype of lead, more so than others. But on top of that, I also think it's important that if you have really in most matchups, you'll have Pokemon that you don't want to switch into. Either you just don't want to, or you literally can't. And that actually eliminates a lot of your options. It makes it a lot easier to pick a lead when you start there and then pick the better lead Pokemon from there. So if we look at the matchup, right off the bat, a Pokemon I don't want to switch into is Terrakeldeo. Terrakeldeo, in this particular case, if I were to say what Terra could be, you'd probably want it to be a Terra that our Ogerpon won't plow through, unless of course we've seen a lot of Terrakeldeo on this channel, especially recently. Terra Fight isn't bad because the Vacuum Wave hits Ogerpon very hard. Secret Sword also probably plows through Dragalge. So, and then obviously Gliscor resists Secret Sword, but of course the faster Water move is gonna hit just as well. So I think it's fair to assume that it could be a Terra Fight Keldeo, and if it's any of the other types, then whatever. Like certainly it could be Poison, or resist the Ivy Cudgel. But as far as picking a lead, we're going to want to pick something that's not going to get smoked off rip by a Terra Fighting, Spec Secret Sword, or I guess it could be Black Belt, and you could switch moves with Surf. So right off the bat, that eliminates a lot of our options. We're not going to lead Gliscor. We're not going to lead Greninja. Ogerpon, probably not, because I'm pretty sure that if he's lead Keldeo into Ogerpon, and he might be Poison, and then he would just eat, and then if he's fighting, he might kill, or maybe he's Scarf fighting even. But Ogerpon's likely not going to get the better of him in that situation. Rotom probably will at least force a Water Click. So if you led Rotom, then you could pivot Dragalge. That could potentially work. I'm sort of already getting ahead of myself a little bit when it comes to sequences. I'm already sort of talking in them. A Scizor could live a hit. So I think Scizor is possible. Dragalge is possible. Dragalge can't switch in, but it can lead. It can always take one and then probably KO back, or at least do a lot. Granbull, no. Yeah, so right off the bat, I'll tell you, I think just because of the Terra Shell ability with Terapagos, I think that also can lead. Just more out of technicality. I don't know that that's an amazing lead. I guess if you led and you were like Spec Starstorm, that's something you could do. But I'm not necessarily trying to pick the lead that's like best for this matchup. It'll depend a lot on how the rest of the team shakes out, and then also, like, if I were building for this, I would want to get Mox and then see maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. But I'm gonna pick one of the three I just mentioned: Dragalge, Scizor, or Terapagos, and then we're just gonna flowchart it out. The one that has my eye the most is the Scizor, because if you look at his possible leads, you have a Meowscarada that's fairly likely. You have Jirachi, which is fairly likely. We do live one from Keldeo. Then there's the Glamora. The one that's the most kind of cringy is the Landorus. But if we're something like Helmet, his best move might be Knock or U-turn. We'll at least get something out of that. Maybe he U-turns and then we knock on switch, or he rocks and he knocks. So I think the reason I don't pick Dragology is just because I don't know for certain that, like, if you're building for this that you bring Dragology. I probably would if it were me, but I don't necessarily want to go in assuming like that I'm going to bring the 7th or 8th pick of my draft right off the bat. Usually I don't build that way. So of the Pokemon that are clearly this person's better Pokemon, we'll start with Scizor. And as far as this paper is going, the top is going to be what happens first, and I'll work my way to the bottom. That will be more relevant later. But we're going to start with lead Scizor. This is our lead. And we'll put a box around it. And what leads do we think he could be? I think one of them is Meowscarada. Put a box around that. I think one is Lando. I think one is Jirachi. And I think one is Glamora. We're running out of space here already. And then we'll say one is Keldeo. Okay, so honestly, when I'm building any team, I entertain the possibility that he could lead anything for the most part. And probably you should too, but at least when we're in the early phases of picking what we're going to lead it all in the first place, we can pick these. So let's say he leads Keldeo, right? So it's Scizor versus Keldeo. What clicks could Keldeo do? I think if he's the lead Terra Fight set, I think he would Specs Secret Sword. And I think otherwise he would probably flip turn. I think he also could spec Surf. I think really the options are he either attacks or he flip turns or he hard switches. These are really the two plays that the Keldeo is going to have. I guess technically there's a world where he could just CM, but I think that's very bad. So just because like if we attack once and then really he's probably in Ogerpon range if he does CM. So if we think Scizor, if it's in order to have a decent enough lead exchange versus Keldeo, we need to be able to take a Specs Surf or a Specs Terra Secret Sword, and we need to be able, well, really, I guess flip turn, whatever is an issue. But once we do that, we need to be able to punish this Keldeo back in some way. So starting with Keldeo, we're gonna see the only way that comes off the top of my head that we're gonna do notable damage is if we dual wing beat, and if we can get dual wing beat into bullet punch to kill, then we've done our job. So we're gonna quickly surmise what this Keldeo will be. In terms of speed, we could do faster than Gliscor. I guess that's important. So Keldeo, and it has to be faster than 317. So it will have to run Timid, and we'll start off with Specs. Okay, so we gotta figure out the bulk now. This is not math that I have perfectly off the top of my head. So 508 minus 252, because we'll assume like just max special attack for the purpose of this exercise. And then the speed was 152. So it'll be 104 bulk. So 104. Okay, so we'll assume that we're running with this type of Keldeo. It's possible, obviously it's possible that it will be a different spread, but we can roughly assume that it'll be this type of bulk. I don't think we want to be Orb. Also, like I said, we're going to start with Specs Calcs. If we can't live them, which I'm almost certain we can, then we'll do Black Belt. So Surf or Sphere, and then I think I'm going to put Hydro as well. Just maybe not Hydro, we'll see. So that does 1,000,000. Let's see, if we were max Spadef, how much would that do? So we could definitely live it with some health. Let me see. I want to do something like this. We would need at least that much to always live. And we'll do Terra Fighting. Where's the fight? There it is. Okay. Ore Sphere. Oh, this is the other one. Secret Sword. That's what I was tripping on. Okay, so we'll always live Ore Sphere, we'll always live Secret Sword, we'll always live Pump, and we'll always live Surf, even if he's choice specs, with 248 and 88. So, not bad. Now we need this dual wing beat into Bullet Punch to kill. This, now that we have like a lot of attack here, this adds up to 113.4, just looking at it. So we can run this down all the way to, let me see if I can eyeball this. This is 100.8. I think this would be 100.1, right? This is 98, nope, okay. So we need this much for dual wing beat into Bullet Punch to kill. And this is assuming like we got 2 min rolls, like we were like really unlucky, right? Okay, so wing beat into Bullet Punch will drop this. So we have some EVs to spare, we have 88. The highest stat here is obviously attack. So, looks like if we do zero adamant, it still gives us more than we need. So we'll hang on to this for now. So that's what we need for a Keldeo. So we dealt with Keldeo. Now lead Meowscarada. What would a Meowscarada do? Meowscarada sees a lead Scizor. I would just switch out. That's what I would do. So I think the switches here are either, let me try to make like a little block that off. So I think Meows could either U-turn or U-turn / hard switch. And I think another play is like, I guess it could just knock. That play is terrible to me though. So here's the thing, versus Meows, there's one play that covers both of these. Actually, we could U-turn or knock, both of them are good. But U-turn would cover him staying in and him knocking because he would turn into a Protean Dark type and then drop. So all this means for us is that we should add U-turn. That's our next move. Normally, like in other cases, you might want to calc like, oh, I gotta make sure I live. But off the top of my head, I already know that knockoff doesn't come close to killing us. Another item that I think would be good is I think Helmet. Like if he did U-turn on us first, I think Helmet would be nice. I also talked about that with Lando. So we'll put U-turn on and we'll put Rocky Helmet. So we have Meowscarada and Lando taken care of. Now Lando, if it's Lando versus Scizor, we have -1 attack. He'll either rock or U-turn. He could knock, which also gives us a helmet. And I think he could EQ as well. But I don't know. I don't really love that. I don't think something like SD is possible because we have so many good revenges. So I'm not worried about that. U-turn, we have a helmet to cover that. We're not worried about it. We could just we could U-turn ourselves, slow U-turn. If he rocks, does this get this? Oh, this retains defog this gen, so we could run defog on this, and then we could knock ourselves if we packed it, and then EQ. I guess in the event that he EQs, there isn't like an amazing play because it's not where like we're gonna beat him 1v1. So for now, I'll just say we can. This last slot's probably either knock or defog. I'm gonna put knock, and you'll know why next. Which is the next lead could be Jirachi. This Jirachi could be rocks. I don't even know if this is legible. I just realized I don't even know how easy this is to read. It could rock. It could U-turn. It's hard to write in marker, but I chose marker because it's dark enough to see. The next ones will look better, I promise. And then it's also possible that he's lead fire move. That would be not good. The only move in question would be fire punch. And we'll see. So Jirachi, fire punch. Oh, another thing he could do also is he could T-wave. That would also be annoying. All those plays are possible. Scizor's not as concerned about T-wave, I guess. Alright, so we see here that if he's like a defensive set, this Fire Punch still isn't going to kill. If he's max attack, it's still not going to kill. It's only going to kill if it's adamant, and it's still not in his favor. So, to tell you the truth, I'm really not worried about this thing being adamant. I guess, in theory, it could be nice to... It could be nice just to, you know, for peace of mind, just like be sure, be certain that it won't kill. Maybe you can justify it on those grounds. But like Sinistra is also, I'm not worried about that either. But if you want to know what we would do in this scenario, let's say he was Fire Punch, right? If we were to Fire Punch and then just, you know, U-turn, we would only get, out of that, we would only get, he would get almost all of our Scizor, we would get only 25. On the other hand, if we were to knock, he would take roughly half and also lose an item, which is pretty good return. So that's why I think knock is going to be the last move that I want here. And then, I mean, it's up to you whether you want to be concerned about the Fire Punch or not. I guess we'll slide the 44 in defense. And then last, we have Glamora. Now, Glamora is going to get a Toxic Spike every time that it's hit. I imagine what we would want to do is just bullet right away. If he's going to lead... why did I even write that? I trolled. If he's going to lead, what he would do is he would probably be Sash. He would stay in and Rock. I don't remember if this didn't get Spike or not. I'll just write Rock Spike. I don't remember. I know, obviously, Toxic Debris gives T-Spike. But he's mainly here as a Suicide Sash. That'd be my guess. Otherwise, if by some stroke of imagination he is not, then he's definitely switching out. It's also possible that he's like Corrosion Toxic, but I think that's kind of dumb. Honestly, it's pretty stupid. So yeah, this thing doesn't get any moves for Scizor, so all we have to worry about is him like just rocking and spiking, which, I mean, just bullet is fine. So with that in mind, we have, these are like the EVs that we know we need to have. You have an extra 40, and I haven't picked the nature either. So that'll be up to you in this hypothetical to figure out how you want to spend these other EVs. But our hypothetical Scizor lead is going to need these moves, and it's probably going to need Helmet, and it's going to need these EVs. And so now if you run through how this all works, here are the actual sequences, right? In fact, I think I might grab another paper to make this easier to see. So, I mean, what we did was obviously sequencing, but more in terms of like figuring out what we're going to run. So now we'll start with Scizor. This is our lead. The first possible guy is Keldeo, right? So here's turn one. Turn one, let's say Keldeo attacks or it flips. In either case, we have to do a Wing Beat, because the threat of getting this play wrong, let's say we think he's going to flip and he goes for the attack and then we do some other play. Actually, I think I said that backwards. Let's say we think he's going to flip and then he attacks. We'll take 90% and then for like a U-turn or a knock or something silly or stupid like that. So in this hypothetical, whether he flips or attacks, we have to Wing Beat. In both cases, we're going to dual Wing Beat. And then we're going to bullet. BP. So in either case, dual Wing Beat, then bullet. If he flips and switches out, then that would be the next part is what he would do next. And you would just go forward. Say, okay, let's say he flips out. If he flips out, he would probably go into Lando, right? And then if he goes into Lando, you would probably knock or you would U-turn. It just depends. You'd Wing Beat into knock. This would be the Keldeo sequence, okay? So if Keldeo is out, you do a Wing Beat into Bullet Punch. If he attacks, that works out fine. If he flips on the Wing Beat, he'll go into Lando most likely, and then you will knock. This is a sequence. Turn one is the lead. You're going to Wing Beat. Turn three is either knock on Lando or Bullet Punch, depending on what you did that turn. So that's the sequence one. Next, we have the Meowscarada lead. I would say that he's likely just going to U-turn, okay? He also might attack, In either case, you are U-turning, right? Because if he attacks, he'll probably Nocturne to a dark type, take a lot from U-turn and drop. If he U-turns, he's going to U-turn into something you don't want to stay in, so you might as well, U-turn switch out. And after that, it's just going to depend. Maybe he goes in, maybe he's going to U-turn first, so it likely will end up the same. He's going to go Lando, you're going to U-turn, and then when you U-turn, if his Lando's out, you're probably going to go into, if I were to guess, Terapagos or Greninja. It just depends. So that is the Meow sequence. Next, we have, I'll just go in order. So it's Keldeo, we'll do Lando. Next, it's Lando. Lando has the most possible plays of any of these. So he could Rock, he could Knock, he could U-turn, and he could Earthquake. Okay? So, versus probably all of these, you're either knocking or U-turning. And that's really a decision that you're going to make, probably based on the rest of your build. So yeah, I can't answer which you would do right now without building the rest of the team or thinking about it more than I plan to for the purpose of this video. But generally, we're thinking knock or U-turn, and it'll cover basically. It's going to be one or the other, and it's probably not gonna matter which. Like, I imagine it's knock for all four or U-turn for all four. It just depends on what you decide. So that's going to be the Lando sequence. And next we have Jirachi. And Jirachi could Rock, it could T-Wave, it could U-turn, and it could Fire Punch. All of these are on the menu for your lead. And versus all of them, you're probably going to knock off. That'd be my guess. Because in the event that he's Fire Punch, you will live, but trading all of Scizor for effectively 20% if you were to U-turn is not good. So if you knock, you get half and an item. So versus all of these, you're going to knock. You're going to knock off. So that is the Jirachi sequence. And then last we have the Glimmora, which, as I had said, you're just going to bullet. There's no click that Glimmora will do that will change how you play that. So this is how we've built a lead based on using sequencing. And once we have the finished product, you now know what you're gonna do in every single scenario, every single one. Keldeo, Meows, Lando, Jirachi, Glimmora. You know what you're gonna do in every single one, and you've built it based on these plays. So now when you go into the game, not only do you know that this works because you kind of worked from the play and then worked yourself backwards in the builder, but you already know what you're going to do. You're going to do a Wing Beat and then Bullet Punch into Keldeo. Versus Meows, you're going to U-turn. Versus Lando, you're going to knock or U-turn. Versus Jirachi, you're going to knock. Versus Glimmora, you're going to bullet. You already know. It's nothing to think about. All right. So that is the lead example. It's going to get a little more interesting when we get to the other ones. So I need to shuffle some things around and then we'll do that. So give me 1 second. Okay, so next we have an SM matchup, and what I'm going to do here is we're going to figure out how to sequence a defensive check or a defensive answer. So the opposing team that we're building against has a few very strong defensive Pokemon. There's the Tapu Koko, there's the Zard, there's the Superior, and the Diggersby. The Koko and Superior both can be Z moves. I know it says Terra, but it's Z moves. So let me think. Which one do I want to do? The Zard, I think the Zard's probably going to be a bad example. Like if I were to work through the Zard sequences, it's not going to be a good demonstration. Superior is probably too easy to check because I just use Goodra maybe or Togekiss. So I think I'm going to do the simple and easiest to understand. We're going to find a way to check Tapu Koko. Now, if you look, there's a very obvious one that you'll see versus Koko. Actually, funny enough, AV Goodra can take Gleam very well from Tapu Koko if you didn't want to run Steelix, because Steelix is pretty passive. But we're gonna do Steelix, and I think it'll just be the easiest example. Now, here's the deal: when we did the flowchart for the Scizor was on top because we're doing a lead and it comes first. But when we're talking about a defensive check, or really, honestly, when we're talking about anything other than a lead, the first thing that happens is not your Pokemon take on the field. It's actually what you're reacting to, in theory. So in this case, we have Steelix, right? But what happened before Steelix? What happened before Steelix was Koko. Koko came out first. So now you have to ask yourself, what did Koko come in on? So if you look, Koko can come in on Togekiss Air Slash. It probably doesn't take a lot from Gleam either, so that's a pretty safe one. It could have also possibly come in on Rotom if it's Roost and it has enough bulk to take Hydro Pump, like under half from Hydro Pump, then that might be the case. But the main one I'm seeing actually probably is the Togekiss. Everything else is kind of a tough switch. So we'll say Togekiss. I'm only gonna use the Togekiss example because I'm thinking about it. If we had Rotom out versus a Koko, we might even stay in. It really just depends. Okay, so we'll say he comes in on Togekiss. If he comes in on Togekiss, he's likely clicking Electric Move or U-turn if he's anticipating it. So as we bring in Steelix, the Koko is either Koko U-turn or Koko T-Bolt. If T-Bolt, then obviously that's good. Another possible thing that Koko did is because it's Z move, Koko did Z Nature's Madness. And what that does, if you do not know, Nature's Madness naturally works like Ruination. It's the original Ruination, where it does half of whatever you have left. But Nature's Madness, if you Z it, does 75%. So these are all of the plays that Koko could do as you bring in Steelix. So the important thing to take away here is that what was I gonna say? My brain froze. The important thing to take away here is that when you're talking about either the defensive check or anything that's not a lead, there's a separate question you have to answer. It's not just if my opponent does this, what will I do? The question you have to answer is, how does your Pokemon get on the field? In the case of the defensive check, this is kind of the entire thing that you're doing. This will be this piece will be more interesting to talk about when we talk about the Wincon at the end here. But when it comes to Steelix, Steelix is coming in on the Koko. And so not only does Koko have to come in first, but what is Koko doing, right? Koko's U-turning, it's T-bolting, or it's Nature's Madness. So let's say Koko U-turns. If Koko U-turns, here are the Pokemon that he would likely bring in. He would likely bring in Diggersby. I'm actually going to try and block that off. He might bring Diggersby. I'll write Diggs there. Zard X or Swampert. One of these is what's coming in. Swampert, Diggersby, or Zard X. So what are you going to do versus these guys, right? If you need to keep Steelix healthy for the Tapu Koko, then it's very likely that you don't want to stay in on any of them. If you don't want to stay in on any of them, then you're going to need to make sure that you have a switch in to all three of these Pokemon. In the case of Zard X, this is obviously going to be very difficult. Now, that doesn't mean it's impossible, but that's something you're going to have to figure out in the builder. So let's say in all these cases, I don't want to stay in because I want to keep my Koko healthy, right? So I'm going to switch. Now, what you'll find when building is like, what if, okay, well, I can't switch, right? If he does that, if I switch, then he'll just get a Pokemon. Then two things: you either conclude that Steelix can't come and that you're gonna check Koko some other way, or you decide that you're gonna be a set that's going to be able to tank from these Pokemon and trade them, and then you'll do something else. So you might end up saying, okay, I'm going to let Steelix die, but at least I'm going to get a Pokemon out of it. In this case, we know that I know that the Steelix can live an Earthquake from Diggersby. So you might the situation might be you just take an Earthquake and then you attack back. Pert is actually very easy to switch in. So I think Pert you can always switch out on. So I don't think you have to worry much about that. In the case of Zard, right? Zard is going to be the big one. You're probably going to need like Akaberry, and then like Akaberry Earthquake. That's probably what you're going to do, right? So for let's assume that our Steelix is going to come, right? Let's assume because I said like, oh, if you decide you can't switch into Steelix, then you can't bring or switch into Zard X, then you can't bring the Steelix. That very well might be the case, but let's just say that we're not doing that. So versus Pert, we're not worried. We can switch into Pert very easily. We can go hard Rotom, and then we can even defog if he rocks. Everything's gonna be fine. In Gen 7, Rotom gets defog. So we're not worried about Pert. I'm pretty sure that Steelix... Oh, I have to go to Gen 7. Steelix... I'm almost certain that Steelix can live from Diggersby. Let's say he's Choice Banned. That'd be like the worst thing ever, right? Let's say he's banded. We would need... Oh my god. You know what? Here's a real question. How likely is he to be banned? That's the real question. There are 2 ground immunes, and then Steelix is the normal immune, but it's kind of hard to go hard Steelix when you don't know what the other one is. Let me say when you don't know what the other one is. When the other stab is super effective, it's a little freaky. I have a scratch on my leg. So you can decide if you're worried about banded in particular. You can decide that you want to EV for it. That's something you can certainly decide to do. It'd be something like 240, and then I think that was 96 that it said. 96 impish. Okay. Sure, whatever. When you're building, you might decide that you actually don't think he'll be banned, and then you don't have to worry about this. But let's just say you did. Okay. So then you'll live, and you'll want to hit back. Gyro base power is 99. It's actually it's more. It's 110. Heavy Slam stronger in this case? Heavy Slam is 120. So we'd want to be Heavy Slam. That would do a lot. Does it get counter? It doesn't get counter. Yeah, so I guess the best you can do is like you can either Toxic or be Heavy Slam. Let's just say Heavy Slam. All right. Let's just say you're going to take the EQ, and then you're going to Heavy Slam back. That's what you're going to do. And let's say you need it to be a 2 KO. Let me see. What if he is... What Diggersby would this be, hypothetically? If he's banded, he's probably going to want to outspeed like a defensive Mew, probably. And if I remember correctly, defensive Mew, let's say you were like min, it would be 243. That's what you'd want to hit. So you would do something like this. Banded in particular. All right, so let's see. Okay, so banded in particular, it would be 508 minus 204 minus max attack 252. You get 52. So if we're facing specifically banded, it'd probably be a bulk like this. All right. So, and you'd want Heavy Slam to at least threaten a 2 KO. So you probably want to be something like this, 132. All right. So now the real thing we need to look at is Charizard X. The Flare Blitz. Okay, so Flare Blitz actually without Akaberry just doesn't kill us, which is pretty sick actually. So you don't need Akaberry. All right. Even if you're adamant, this isn't killing either. All right. So we know that we live. Flare Blitz, he would take like 29. And then, so if we stayed in and he took 30 and then a mineral 67, he'd basically be dropped, right? So this as is actually, if Coco U-turns on Steelix and he goes Zard X, we actually can just attack and it'll kill it. So that's cool actually. It's possible that we're gonna want to do more on that front, but we'll see. So the next option is Coco T-Bolts, right? So if Coco T-Bolts, Coco T-Bolts, right? We're gonna Earthquake the Zard. But if Coco T-Bolts, what we probably want to do, because he's almost certainly switching out, right? We probably just want to Stealth Rock, because nothing he can click is gonna damage us. And his likely switch is probably Pert, if I were to guess. He also could go Hitmontop. And remember I said that, because there's something I want to hit at the end here. Wow, I'm holding blue. Whoops. I just grabbed a blue. So versus Coco T-Bolt, we're probably going to rock. We'll see what he does next. The most interesting one is Coco Nature's Madness. Okay, so Nature's Madness. What's the best way that we can shrug this off? If you play Gen 7, you know the answer to this, which is run Iapapa Berry. So what Iapapa Berry does is it gives you 50% health once you hit 25%. So in theory, if Nature's Madness is 75, it'll proc the Iapapa and we'll be back at 75, which is great. So it'll be as if it didn't do anything. The problem is what I have here is an HP that is not divisible by 4. And if it's not divisible by 4, then the Nature's Madness will leave you technically at like 25.1. So I think 352, yeah, 352 is divisible by 4. So I would do something like this, and that would cover it. So Iapapa Berry, Heavy Slam, Earthquake, Rocks. Okay. So the way we've worked it out is we have the defensive check of Steelix. It covers U-turn. And if he goes into Pert, we switch out, we go into Digs. It really depends on how you build the rest of it, what you want to do about that. Because there's, like I said, there are 2 ground immunes, so you could decide like, I don't want Diggers. I don't want to take the Diggersby EQ. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring, Rotom. I'm going to bring like Fizdef Rotom to take to switch in on the EQ because it's immune. So now it's like, okay, if Diggs comes in, then the sequence is you switch into Rotom. That's what you would do. And then versus Zard, you would stay in and EQ. And then maybe now that we have Iapapa Berry on this, maybe the way it works is he U-turns, he goes Zard, you Flare Blitz, puts you into Iapapa, and you EQ. Then you're back at 75%. That would be a good sequence. And then versus Pert, you would also go Rotom, actually. You would also go Rotom. So that's how you would handle U-turn. And then versus Coco, you would just rock. And then versus the Iapapa would pop. So you'd be back at 75%. And then you would rock on this turn as well. So basically, if Coco U-turns, you would either switch into Rotom or you would Earthquake if he goes into Zard. You also could say, because Zard won't have Mega Evolved yet, so it's possible that you can run Stone Edge to catch him if he doesn't Mega Evolve. You could do that. So we'll just say like attack. You're gonna EQ or you're gonna Edge. It's up to you. It depends on how you build. Up to you. So yeah, if he U-turns, here are the sequences. If he U-turns to Pert, you go to Rotom. If he U-turns to Diggersby, it's up to you. But let's say, for this, we'll say you're also going to Rotom. If he U-turns to Zard X, you're going to attack, whether it's Earthquake or Edge, up to you. If Coco T-Bolts, you're going to rock. If Coco Z Nature's Madnesses, it's going to pop Iapapa Berry, and you'll be back at 75%, and then you're going to rock. And those are the sequences, how you would build a defensive check. So the reason this is different, obviously, is you need to answer the question of how you're going to get in. Now, in the case of a defensive check, that is the entire question, so it's not as hard to answer. But yeah, the flowchart works this way. The Steelix is actually in the middle this time. There's something that happened before it, and then you deal with what happens after it. In this case, it's very easy because Coco comes in on Togekiss. So Coco probably is like, that T-Bolt U-turn, Nature's Madness. But in other cases, it's actually important to know what Coco is going to be clicking as you come in. And that's going to be informed by what's in front of Coco when you switch out, right? Like, for example, if it was... Let me think. Let's say you brought Goodra. If it was a Goodra in front of Coco, then let's say it's Goodra. If it's Goodra in front of Coco, then what you're switching into is actually probably Dazzling Gleam, maybe, right? I actually don't know that. It might still be Nature's Madness or U-turn. But I'm just saying, like, what's in front of it is going to depend on what you're switching into, right? So That's how the defensive check works. And okay, I'm gonna shuffle everything around, and then we're gonna do the Wincon, which is the last big thing. So give me 1 second. All right, so finally we're going to do the Wincon, and this is an Oris matchup. Now that I'm looking at it, the draft that I'm building from is way better than the other one. So yeah, building for this wouldn't be in general very hard. So the Wincon you come to, obviously, if you were building for this, you're going to think about it way longer and harder over the course of a week than I will in the minute that I'm doing it here. But if I were to look at the Pokemon that's most likely to just smoke this team out, it is probably the Mega Gallade. It's actually the only thing that's even capable of setup. I mean, I believe Crocodile still gets bulk up. Torn and Rotom don't get Nasty Plot this gen. But also, it isn't necessarily the case that like a Wincon is only something that setups, right? It just depends. But just looking at the team, that's kind of what it looks like from my point of view. Because yeah, you could have like a Scarf, like a really strong breaker that with Scarf, like that it can just clean. That could also be a Wincon. But in this case, we're going to be dealing with a setup Wincon. So I'm going to pick Gallade. It's going to be an SD Gallade. So we're going to put Gallade here. And put it in a box. So I'm going to pull up the Gallade. And it's going to have Swords Dance. Okay. So the first thing you have to answer is, how is this Gallade going to hit the field? One of the ways is on a KO, right? But like in that case, like you wouldn't have to switch in, right? But what you're coming in front of on a KO also matters. So I don't want to even deal with this one too much because it's really just going to depend. Like for example, if Noivern gets a KO, then Gallade maybe doesn't come in, right? But if Drapion gets a KO, then that's prime real estate for Gallade to come in safely and probably get like a pretty uncontested SD. I mean, not necessarily. Drapion has some things like if Drapion stayed in and just toxic, that'd be annoying. That could also be a reason to run Taunt, but that's for another day. Actually, no, it's not for another day. It is for today. But I'm getting ahead of myself, is what I mean to say. So on a KO, let's put it to the side. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it looks like it's gonna all be on a KO, except for Drapion, because Gallade can't just like switch into Excadrill. The EQ or the Ironhead will do a lot. It can't go hard Serp because it'll take a little bit from a +0 Leaf Storm, but also Glare either on that turn or the subsequent turn. They're both too bad for Gallade, so we don't want to come in hard on Serperior or really on Serperior at all. The Tyrantrum maybe if we pivoted in on Rock move. I don't know that Tyrantrum's even coming at all. I actually personally like Tyrantrum a lot, but I don't know. We're not coming in on Gardevoir either because Hyper Voice is a million. I guess Gallade could pivot in on Gardevoir if it was clicking HP Fire on Klefki, but we wouldn't be able to SD in that situation. That's the problem, because like on the subsequent turn, Gardevoir can Hyper Voice, it can Wisp or whatever. So it's really looking like if we're gonna SD, it's gonna be on a KO, and it's gonna be in front of it's gonna be on something we force out. That's what it seems like. So I guess that kind of simplifies some things now that I'm looking at it. So it's gonna be on a KO, and the things that it would be on are Excadrill would be forced out. Drapion would be forced out. Volcanion probably wouldn't be forced out. Let's say Tyrantrum would be forced out, but I don't know if it's even coming. And Gardevoir might be forced out, but it's hard to know exactly. We'll say Guard anyway, because now that I think about it, it could end up being useful. So we have SD. We gotta think. So we're gonna come in on the Exca, the Drape, the Tyrantrum, or the Gardevoir after a KO. And what we do in each of these scenarios is gonna be a bit unique, possibly. So let me think. So we have SD. There are two Pokemon that are faster than Glade. Both of them threaten it in a meaningful way. And when I say meaningful, like the Superior doesn't kill ever, but Glare would be devastating, right? So that's like bad enough. Glare is as good as killing a Glade in this case. And then the other one is Noivern. So how are we going to beat Noivern? If we're on one end, like we would need Noivern to just be dead, right? Noivern completely dead. So that's one way to look at it. Another is like, let's just say that Noivern is alive though. What do we need to do to beat Noivern? A couple of things. We could run enough bulk to reliably eat Hurricane. That's one thing we could do. We would want to see how much we would need to do that. Noivern. Yeah, it could be Specs. Ooh, if it's Specs, that's just not going to happen. So let's say it's not Specs. If it's not Specs, then we would need some HP, but not this much. Let's say we'll do 128. All right. So to live a Cane, we'll need that much. That's one way to look at it. Now the problem is like Life Orb could make things complicated. So we're never living a Life Orb, or we're living an Expert Belt. We're not living an Expert Belt either. All right, so the bulk is like whatever you want it to be. Maybe you care about living that timid, non-item boosting Hurricane. Maybe you don't. But the fact is that we also could run Shadow Sneak. Another thing you could also consider is if you weren't SD, because if you look at the team, without SDing, you do kill like a lot of guys naturally. So another way you could look at it is if you were like, this set could be this, and this is like if you weren't gonna SD and you wanted to eat a hit from Noivern, you could do something like this, right? This Wincon also works because you see on the screen, like the Poison Jab would hit the guard, Poison Jab and Ice Punch would both hit. Serp, CC blows up Tyrantrum, Drapion, Volcanion, Ferrothorn, Excadrill. So you would need to know the calcs offhand, because like Poison Jab doesn't one-shot Gardevoir, so you need to know that like, okay, Gardevoir has to be at 71% before I go for the P-Jab. But yeah, so that's one way to look at it. The other one is you would need Shadow Sneak. You need SD and you need Shadow Sneak, and you would need, in order to win, you would need +2 Superior or Noivern to be in range of the Sneak. What's kind of cool about this is that if they don't go hard Noivern, even less so hard Serp, it's possible there's a world you get 2 SDs off, because let's say like Superior or Noivern are the only ones that can revenge. You don't want to go hard Serp and like possibly die, right? So it's possible he's gonna switch around on something that you SD and he goes into a sack, and then it's like, oh well, this is something that doesn't beat me, right? So I'll SD again. So that's one way to look at it. But those are some sequences. I'm kind of saying them kind of quick. So let's say Glade comes in on Excadrill. Excadrill switches out. Versus Exca, you're gonna SD. Versus Drape, you could SD, you could CC. The thing is, what you'd be worried about in the case of Drapion is you'd be worried about probably Toxic. That'd be the problem. So you can either SD and risk getting Toxic. You can CC if you're in range of getting the kill, or you can run Taunt. So that's sort of the question: is do we have room for Taunt? Let's just say we do right now. Let's just say we do for the moment. So that's what you do. You either SD, you'd CC, or you Taunt on Drape. Versus Tyrantrum, you would SD. You would also SD on Tyrantrum. And versus Guard, you can live one Hyper Voice. So I think you would SD only if you're ready to win. Like if you're gonna win after the SD, then you would SD. Otherwise, you just pick up your kill, I guess. That will just depend. But for the sake of the Wincon, we'll say USD. Because otherwise, like, we're not dealing with that. But all of these are after a KO. Blade really doesn't pivot in that well on most things. Yeah, really, other than just like the HP Fire Guard, this is the only time you'd really get it in, like on Clef Key. Now I think about it, it's possible that I don't know if Guard would even run that. I don't know. Anyway, so these are all the situations that you would run it. So now we have SD, Sneak, and Taunt right now. Sneak hits the faster guys, the Serp and the Noivern. Sneak also is super effective on Gardevoir. You do need an SD to possibly 2 to get a full kill. You'll need some chip otherwise. And then when it comes to Drill, Drape, Bulk, Ferroseed, and Tyrantrum, CC hits them all. So you can be close combat or Drain Punch in this case. Either of them work. And then this one, the way it would work is like you would come in on one of these guys and then you would light screen. This is if Noivern is alive. You'd probably light screen. You still gotta worry about the glare superior. So you'd probably just need Serp to be dead if you were to do a set like this. But yeah, this is like an alternative set. That technically works. You don't have a super effective hit on. Actually, no, you have Poison Jab on guard, so disregard that. But that set I just wrote like that's actually something that would work in theory. It would depend on. You might mock and see which one's better, but for this exercise, this is better. This is like an easier one to do. So, Swords Dance. What do we need to be faster than? The fastest guy that we can outspeed is Gardevoir. So we will have to be Jolly. Let's see. Do we have to be Jolly? Gardevoir would want to outspeed our Crocodile. And Gardevoir has to be timid to do that because Crocodile hits 311 and Modest Gardevoir hits 299. So if Gardevoir has to be timid anyway, then it doesn't have to give up too many more EVs to be max speed. So with that in mind, I think that we should just be this speed. But hold on, here's the thing. Our way of hitting guard is Shadow Sneak, which is priority. So if the only time we're ever hitting guard is with priority, then we don't need to outspeed it. So what's the next thing? The next thing is Drapion. Do we think Drapion will be fast? Personally, I don't think so. I don't think fast Drape is good at all. Excadrill. I don't think Excadrill will be fast either. So it's possible that we could be a very bulky Gallade. I don't think Drill will be fast. I don't think Drape will be fast. Because like let's say Drapion is fast to cover a Crocodile. What does it click? It doesn't get anything for the Crook. Like Aquatail doesn't do that much, especially if it's like intimidated after an Aquatail. Similar story for Excadrill. I mean, Excadrill just doesn't outspeed Crocodile. So the next fastest thing is like Rotom. But do you think he's gonna be max speed Rotom? I guess this Rotom matchup isn't bad. The Tyrantrum actually walls it. That's interesting. So if I were to think like the next, if we're not gonna outspeed Guard, the next fastest thing that I could imagine even having speed would be a Dragon Dance Tyrantrum. And I think that's what we're gonna cover with our speed. So the fastest thing that a Tyrantrum would want to outspeed is our Tornadus. So Tornadus hits, I believe it hits 375 max speed. So if we were to be, if Tyrantrum wanted to Dragon Dance 251, yeah, it'd be 251 speed. Can it hit that naturally? Oh, it has to be Jolly to do that. The thing is, what he could do, he could cover a Torn creeping a Serp. So let's say Serp was, because my inclination is to think that Tyrantrum would want to be adamant if it can. So Torn, if Torn wanted to creep a superior that was 357, that was max speed, it would be 358. So Tyrantrum would want to hit 359. So 359 divided by 1.5, 239. So 240 would get it. All right, if it was trying to creep a Torn creeping a Serp, he also could argue like, okay, what are the odds that Torn runs Focus Blast specifically for the Tornadus, or not the Tornadus, the Tyrantrum? So he could think like, hey, in worst case, like if I don't outspeed, then I probably live a hit anyway. He could think that. He also could just be Jolly. He could be Jolly 251, and that would also work. So let's see. Max speed Adamant, I already outspeed that, and the Tyrantrum that would run DD to outspeed Tornadus, I also naturally outspeed that. Max speed Tyrantrum, I could run this, and then I wouldn't have to worry about it at all. And then I would also cover Volcanion. So I think I'm gonna run this. I guess that's kind of funny, but whatever. So I'd run this amount of speed, and then after that I'd probably just run like max attack, and then maybe rest in HP, something like this, or maybe put it in defense. I don't know. But okay, so we have this set, and so we're in front of, and the way this is sequenced is we would come in on a KO in almost every instance, because coming in hard on any of these guys is not great. I think if we were to come in hard on Drap, that's the most likely, because I mean, we could get lucky on the P-Jab. Actually, he doesn't have a lot of things that he could P-Jab on. I think he'd want to knock versus most of these guys. I think Drap probably is our main way in. So I guess I didn't really think about that the first time. So let's say it is we have Gallade, and here are the ways to come in. Exca KO, Drap KO, Drap, we'll say Drap knock, and we'll say Tyrantrum KO. We could also do Tyrantrum rock move, head smash. We probably eat a head smash. I believe that's all of them, right? Oh, also there's a guard KO. That one's a little sticky. Okay, so all of these are the scenarios. So versus guard, we would SD, then sneak. Versus drill, we would SD, and then it really depends on what he goes into. But I mean, it would be, SD or an attack after, basically. We come in on Drap, whether it's by knock or not. I think you kind of got to feel it out. You're either going to SD or you're going to taunt. It really depends. Because, like, for example, let's say he goes hard guard because he quad resists to CC. That'd be a risky play, but it's possible. You could taunt the Drapion to prevent Toxic. Goes guard. You can SD now because you have Hyper Voice and then clean. It's also possible that you just want to SD. You don't think he's Toxic and then you clean. It's possible that he only has a couple mons left, so even if he did Toxic you, you'll live in enough turns that the Toxic chip won't take you out. So SD or taunt, it will be situational, but I think when you're in the game situation, it will be obvious which one you want to do. Another one is there's a Safeguard. You could run Safeguard instead of taunt. That might even be better, actually. I think that's actually better. Yeah. Because Safeguard, Serp couldn't come in after and glare you. And also, if he P-jabbed you, he wouldn't be able to status you either. So, yeah, not taunt, Safeguard would be better. So SD or Safeguard, it just depends. And then versus Tyrantrum, you would definitely SD, for sure. You would SD, and then attack. So, now you need to say, okay, what do I need in order for this to work? In order to clean, you would need Noivern. Let's see. So a +2 sneak against no bulk does about this much. So that's kind of a lot to ask for. So I think you might want to SD, and then you have the bulk to live a hurricane, most likely, especially if rocks are up. So I think you would want to SD and then sneak. That's probably what you want to do. And you would need, and if that's the case, you don't need a lot of chip at all. If he's lower, then you'd need like 30% off. Then you could SD, sneak. It really will just depend on the situation. But like when you're dealing with a Wincon, you're gonna want to know these calcs. Gardevoir, that takes a lot. Looks like a +2 sneak. Gardevoir's bulky a lot, so a +2 sneak almost always kills. So you just need to SD, and you're gonna be good. And then the other big one is Serperior. Serperior is gonna take sneak very easily. So Serperior, honestly, yeah, you need this thing at half. Actually, that's out of 2 SDs. Yeah, honestly, you need Serp basically dead, or like at like 30% to guarantee. So these are the types of things you'd want to keep in mind when you're setting up. You want to make sure you have those conditions checked, and then these are your opportunities to come in. And then and then the sequence would be coming on Exca, and then coming on Exca, SD, coming on Drape, SD or Safeguard, coming on Tyrantrum, SD, coming on Guard, SD, Sneak. Those are the sequences. And so I do want to go back to I actually crumpled these papers up. Is this the Steelix example? It's not. Where's my Steelix one? I do want to come back to Steelix. Oh, there it is. I shouldn't have crumpled this up. There's one thing I didn't mention. Let me actually pull this. Let me pause right 1 second and pull this up. Okay, so one thing, one plus of sequences that I wanted to highlight, and the SM example that I have here is the best example. So I ran through all these scenarios of the things that we would do with the Steelix out. But another good thing about sequences is when you're thinking in the way that I'm kind of evangelizing here, is when you do this same thought process, but try to think about it from your opponent's perspective, it gives you team compositions. Just by looking at them, you can kind of deduce very effectively what sets your opponents are without them actually revealing it. So, as an example, you see that that Charizard here. That's a Pokemon that needs Rocks Off basically most of the time. It needs Rocks Off to do well because, especially like pre-Mega, it'll take half. The 2 removers on this team are Hitmontop and Tapu Koko. So basically, right off the bat, if Hitmontop doesn't come, you can deduce one of 2 things. Either the Tapu Koko is defog, and that's how he's going to get rid of hazards, or that the Charizard is going to lead, right? Because like lead Zard doesn't have to worry about hazards if your plan is like lead Charizard, and then just like Flare Blitz or like just attack until you go down. So when Steelix comes out on Koko, if there's no Hitmontop, you'll know that Koko's moves are, if he U-turns, you know it's U-turn. You'll know Defog is one of the moves. You'll probably know that T-Bolt, and then you can deduce that T-Bolt is probably one of the moves because that's going to be your only strong hit on Togekiss, and it's your strongest hit on the Infernape, the Mew, the Rotom, or whatever, the Beedrill. And so right away, even though he's only technically revealed U-turn, you almost already know the top of Koko's full set. Like right away. Basically, the first time Koko comes out, if Hitmontop is benched, you know Koko's set almost immediately. That's like a huge advantage of thinking these sequences out, because if you think about it from your opponent's perspective, if he goes Koko, your opponent, or let's say I'm Koko now. I bring out Koko, Steelix comes in, U-turn. I think he's gonna rock, so I go Hitmontop. Or
if Hitmonchan doesn't come, then I need to go straight into something that's going to threaten Steelix out so that I keep rocks off, because when Coco U-turns, I can't double back into Coco because I don't have a move to hit the Steelix. So I'm going to U-turn on Steelix. I have to go into something that's going to 100% kill it. So that could be, the Band Diggersby, that could be the Purr or the Zard or whatever. If I'm Coco and then I Z Nature's Madness, really, that scenario always gives up rocks. So I'd probably definitely, it would be Nature's Madness, default U-turn, and then T will be last. So yeah, I mean, maybe this is a little, I don't know how, maybe the example I just gave isn't confusing, but yeah, when you think it through in this way, you can deduce the team comp right away, basically, based on what does or doesn't come, what moves are revealed, because you know that to meet as a prerequisite to be useful in certain sequences, they need certain moves, whether they've technically revealed them or not. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
So I do have one final thing that I think would be helpful to cover on this topic, and I just sort of tacked on at the end here. I took the crumpled paper that I just had and rewrote it more neatly and legibly. But now that using this understanding of sequencing, how to fit it into, how do I say this? How to use it for troubleshooting and solving specific problems in the builder. Now, this is kind of like it's kind of a weird way that I'm saying this, but basically anytime you're building and there's either something that you don't know perfectly how to solve, like, oh, this particular Pokemon rips through my team, or maybe you're getting mocks and there's just a certain Pokemon or a combination of Pokemon or a certain set of plays that are like always giving you trouble, and you don't really know exactly how to fine-tune your team to deal with it. And of course, sometimes it requires more than a fine-tuning, but that's besides the point. This understanding of sequencing provides a much more focused lens with which you can understand dealing with those problems. So a lot of times it can be very frustrating, either someone trying to help me, like I've experienced this in a friend setting or a team tour setting, or when I'm trying to help someone else, and it's like, let's say they didn't necessarily go through a building process that like sequences this, but they're going through mocks, and there's just, let's say, whether they've mentally visualized a sequence for these sets, sequences or like series of turns or exchanges or interactions or whatever word you want to use are happening nonetheless. And so let's say we're going down one of these trees in a mock, and some of these paths are working and some of them are not. And so what they'll do is like, oh well, this particular path, of which there are many in a mock, isn't going well, so I'm just gonna like willy-nilly just change an item, change a set, maybe, or not change a set, change an item, change a move, change a spread. Well, what if I just swapped this move and then I would be better in this path? And it's like, it's not that sometimes that will work, but you need a holistic understanding of what you're doing when you do that. So rather than like, oh, this isn't working in some vague sense, time to change the set, the understanding should be, I'm gonna grab another marker. Hopefully it's clear. This is blue. We'll see how it shows up on the paper. But like, you're not necessarily trying, let's say we take the Steelix here as an example. You're not necessarily saying like, okay, because one of these paths isn't working, then Steelix is the problem and Steelix needs to be changed in some general sense. It's that, okay, this is working, this is working. The specific problem we need to solve is that this is not working. So we need to solve for this problem, not the Steelix problem, but in this case, I happen to circle the Coco Z Nature's Madness into Iapapa into Rock. Now, I happen to pick the one that would pretty much always work, so that was kind of funny. But you get the idea. It's like, your focus should be solving the specific interaction that's giving you trouble, rather than being like, this doesn't work, or this particular situation is giving you trouble. So now, let's say, this is something I see a lot. Let's say, for example, you have a team that's getting ripped by these like Coco U-turn sequences that I have over here, but you have Iapapa for the Z Nature's Madness, and it's like, oh well, this is a good example. This people do all the time. They're like, oh well, this is giving me a hard time, so I'm just gonna completely slash Iapapa Berry, and I'm just gonna make a helmet. That way, when Coco U-turns into Pert, into Diggs, into Zard, it takes Helmet Chip. And, like, in concept, getting Helmet Chip to punish U-turn, like, that's fine and even good. But now what has happened is, like, this Steelix is first and foremost designed to be a consistent check long-term to Coco. So if the Z Nature's Madness set comes, which is a very reasonably likely set in this matchup, your Helmet. So, like, this thing will straight up kill you now because you happen to be mocking against Pert, Diggersby, Zard, U-turn pairs, and now Steelix no longer even serves its purpose, because when you were thinking about how to change Steelix, you weren't thinking what purpose is this intended to serve. You were thinking, in this mock right now, I'm really irritated and things aren't this particular mocker is beating me, and now I'm going to make a major change to deal with what's happening in the mock, rather than like holistically crafting a Steelix, or crafting, like, for example, I brought up how Rotom can be tacked onto the team to switch into the Purr and the Diggersby, rather than crafting a team that's going to deal with the problem that you're dealing with. So understanding sequences can keep you very like problem, or I guess I was going to say solution oriented because that's like the more common word, but I guess problem oriented is more correct for what I'm trying to say here. So a lot of you guys will kind of vibes based. This isn't working, so I'll just like generally either it's a vibes based where the whole like set will just kind of get overhauled, just because like this isn't working, I'm gonna try this, or it's like this other thing happens to be irritating me more in mocks than what I originally brought this for, so I'm just gonna totally swap the item, completely dismantle how the set is supposed to function, and then let's hope it works. So yeah, like when you approach fixing prep in that way, like this is the type of mistake you're gonna make. And so what ends up happening is, like, when you like the helmet makes sense for what you were trying to do, and maybe it'll even come up here, but when your Steelix is here for Coco and you do face the Z Nature's Madness, you're gonna fucking lose. Like, as that's the case, the Steelix is gonna drop instantly, and now you're gonna play the rest of the game. If you look at the matchup that's on the screen, you're gonna play literally the rest of the game with no T-Ball resist. Coco's gonna come in and T-Ball. Everything's gonna die. So like this is a very common thing that I see all the time, and it's like people are just not understanding that, like, you have tangible, practical interactions that are mapped out, and like that's what your Pokemon that you're building is designed to deal with. So it's not like another thing to sort of connect these two ideas together is like, we've gone through like all the different Pokemon you can sequence, the lead, the defensive check, Wincon. Essentially, like, you can take all these sets and like put them together, and you kind of have like a big web of sequences of how each Pokemon is supposed to function. And another thing you should understand is, like, let's say, because there are times where, like, if you do even properly what I just said, you may end up overhauling the Steelix significantly. You may come up with another idea that actually works here. Maybe the Steelix example isn't the best here, but like, just for example, whatever Pokemon you're doing, it may require that you do an overhaul and things actually do significantly change. But you also have to keep in mind, not just like on a more basic level, like, is this Pokemon still retaining the function that you brought it for? That's the big one. But the other is that, like, whenever you make a change, what are you losing and how are you going to make it up? So sometimes, like, in this case, it's obvious, the example I gave where it's like, oh, you lose Iapapa Berry for Helmet, what you give up is Check and See Nature's Madness. But there are, in most cases, it's more complicated than that, where you have different Pokemon on the team, all with their different sequences mapped out, and you change this, and you change something, so this Pokemon doesn't check this other Pokemon as well, or maybe doesn't check it at all, and so now, but you needed that Pokemon to check that Pokemon for this other thing that you have. So whenever you're fixing a problem, is like, you don't want to just be aware of like whether you're retaining the function, but what am I giving up elsewhere on the build when I make this change, and how do I make up for that in the builder? So a lot of guys will be like, oh, I think a big example would be if you took a resist berry off something to check something. Let's say a big one would be let's say you have a Lando T and you want that to check something, but it needs Yachi to do it because it can put it on Ice Punch. And you go through mocks. Oh, let me get ahead of myself. And let's say like Lando checking that thing. Let's say Lando like is the only Pokemon you've necessarily, dedicated to checking that thing, and that also checking that thing is important to clear the way for a different Wincon at the end of the game. But then you go through mocks, and it's like Lando maybe is better suited or more useful for some other purpose. Maybe as an early game, Rock, U-turn, pivot, whatever. Maybe SD Lando, you end up deciding that's better. Whatever, that could be fine. But you can't just use the exact team that you had and just like take the Yachi off, take everything off, and just slap SD in 3 attacks and call it a day, or slap Rocks, U-turn and call it a day. You no longer have that check to the Pokemon that you needed to check for. So you can change that Landorus, but whatever you were doing with the Yachi example I gave, you're gonna have to go make up for that with a different sequence, with a different. You're gonna have a different what you give up. You're gonna have a different one and figure it out that way. So a lot of people's prep adjustments don't take into account the big picture. It's kind of like a difficult balance to strike, because really any of these things are only useful when you're talking about very granular actual turn-to-turn interactions Pokemon are having. But there's still also a holistic picture that's not the holistic picture is not granular, but you do have to be zooming out and thinking like, okay, my team needs to tangibly check this, needs to tangibly check that in order to accomplish X, Y, and Z win path that I've built. I actually have notes on my phone. I'm gonna make sure I covered everything. I think I did. Let me see. Yep, looks like I covered everything. So yeah, hopefully this was helpful. It's a bit better detailed explanation of, effectively how to build, but also like sequences, how they work, not just as the lead, but also in the mid game, in the end game, in the whatever. It's important to think this way because like these are the tangible ways that your sets are actually going to work. If you're not thinking of it in these terms, then you have no sense of like the practical applications of what you're building until you actually get into the mock. And for those of you who don't do this and you don't mock, you're kind of just throwing sets together. You have no idea what you're doing, basically. That's what I would say. Hopefully this was helpful. Obviously, you can reach out in the comments, or you can hit me on Discord if you have any questions. Always here to help. Hopefully this cleared some things up a bit better, some things that maybe my Doing Everything Live series was unable to. So with that, hope you have a good one. See you whenever I see you.